Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. And of course, I'm your host, John June, listening to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. If you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, just make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got the notification bell on so you can get all those notifications for when we drop those new episodes. And continuing the AFC West divisional breakdown, the final installment, I should say, of our divisional breakdowns. Had to bring on a good friend of mine, somebody I met in the community a very long time ago. This is actually our first face-to-face conversation. I'm sure I've seen him on live streams. I'm sure he's seen me on streams, but this is our first time being on together. He's a lead dynasty writer and ranker for GoingFor2.com. Talking about my guy, Mike Hicks at Drop the Mike FF. Mike, what is going on, man?
How's it going, John? Thanks for having me on. Just like you said, long time coming for us, and I just can't wait to get into this.
Definitely, brother. Definitely. The topic is good, man, because we're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. You got your Kansas City hat on. I've got Travis Kelsey behind me over my left shoulder. So, we're rocking and rolling with the theme tonight. And again, AFC West divisional breakdowns, and the Chiefs are, they are out there in Chiefs Kingdom, but they are the kings of the AFC West, especially since number 15 got there. The Chiefs were fresh off a Super Bowl win, just handed out $500 million to their star quarterback and Patrick Mahomes. Things looked like business as usual for them. Kansas City Chiefs went 14-2 in the regular season, first place in the AFC West, and the number one seed in the AFC. They would make it all the way to the Super Bowl again, and they again would be matched up with a team with a loaded defense led by a strong-jawed quarterback who started their career in New England. But this time they would lose, beaten handily by Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Chiefs then went out and spent a lot of capital to upgrade this offensive line, adding Joe Thuney from New England, Orlando Brown Jr. via trade with Baltimore, and Kyle Long, who had sat out of retirement, but they convinced him to come out of retirement, and then Creed Humphrey, who they spent a second-round pick on in the NFL draft to bring in and potentially play center. That's potentially 4 spots on this offensive line where they can possibly get upgraded offensive line play. Mike, I have to ask you, man, what are the vibes around the Chiefs fan base as it pertains to the Chiefs heading into 2021?
The other offensive line addition that I want to add real quick is the fact that Tardif is coming back after sitting out to go work in Canada for COVID in hospitals, because him sitting out, I think, was a big factor too. I think this whole team, the mojo coming out of camp is that we're strong again. The offensive line is back. I don't think fans or the team, or I think we're expecting the team to be the team that we had the year prior. Eric Fisher is gone, but I really don't think that is a big loss. I know some people disagree with me, but I was one of the people that were saying that he was a little bit overrated last year. But this team is going to be fire, and I expect us to be back in the playoff hunt and in the hunt for a Super Bowl once again.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely when you're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and you're talking about Andy Reid and you're talking about Patrick Mahomes, the only goal, the only objective here is Super Bowl. And so I think that every move you make every move the Kansas City Chiefs make, Brett Veach and them, will be about how do we clear up all these chinks in the armor that we may have so we can gear this thing up and go for a Super Bowl. And so it starts and ends with one person, in my opinion. That's Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I said this last year, and I'll say it again. I mean, people give me a lot of flack for it. I mean, I've received some flack for it, but I don't know. I'll continue to say Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback we've ever seen. I don't think I don't think it's really a debate. People talk about, well, what happens if he retired or stopped playing today? I mean, I don't care. I'm just using my eyes and what the numbers tell me to look at a player and see that he's the best that there's ever been at his position. And if he continues on the trajectory that he's on, he'll continue to be the best. But that's neither here nor there. He was phenomenal once again in 2020, completing 66% of his passes for 4,740 yards, 38 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. This was good enough. It's ridiculous what he.
That's
what he
nuts.
It's nuts, right? Again, this guy was good enough to finish as the QB2 overall in fantasy points per game, only behind Dak Prescott at 24.9. So I'm left wondering how a guy who that was already otherworldly in Patrick Mahomes, how can he become better because of this upgraded offensive line? He's going off the board, Mike, as the QB1 according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP. Is there any hesitation to pull the trigger on Mahomes and his third round ADP in 12 team one quarterback redraft leagues?
If you're a guy that likes to draft quarterbacks high, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I wait and fade on QB. But if I decide that I'm going to draft a quarterback high, I'm drafting him there, maybe low end too, if I'm that kind of a guy, because some people thought he had an off year last year compared to the year before, and he still ended up, like you said, with 4,700 yards, a 66%, and only 6 TDs. I mean, that is just mind-boggling. And now he's off of a year with going to have a better offensive line, more time. One of the reasons, just like with other quarterbacks, if you don't have the time and you're, scared about the pocket, you try to get the ball a little bit late. There was times where he threw the ball a little late to Tyreek or to Kelsey. That's another issue. But if he has more time and he can run plays, like I think they're going to even use bootleg more, get him out in the open a little bit. Not saying he's going to run the ball past the line of scrimmage, but get him open, let the guys develop routes down the field. That's going to even be more of a weapon for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, I said third round ADP. In underdog leagues, he does have a third round ADP. Third. He's the 35th pick, but according to this aggregated ADP, he's like the second. He's a second round pick, the 206.
I would take him at 206.
You would take him at 206?
If I was someone that drafted quarterbacks high, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if you subscribe to that notion, especially in one quarterback leagues of drafting quarterback early, then yeah, you might as well just take Patrick Mahomes because that's the best that there's going to be, in my opinion. I mean, I think he's worth it in the third round, depending on how you started, right? Like, let's say you were somehow able to start, you were able to start Kelsey, and then maybe you end up with a guy like a DeAndre Swift, right? Or who I'm very high on. And then you end up with a Patrick Mahomes in the third round. So now you've got the stack of Mahomes and Kelsey. I mean, you could make that would win you. That right there should win you a lot of weeks, having that stack. But for me, I think Mahomes, I like your points about getting him on the move more. I just think that it's just crazy because when I'm looking at these numbers, I'm trying to find an edge, right? Like Mahomes is already, one of the lower sacked quarterbacks in the NFL because he has an ability to be able to extend plays and be able to get out of trouble. So now you're telling me he's going to get out of these high pressure situations. He won't have to create as often. And so now I'm left wondering, is Patrick Mahomes going to reach a ceiling that we have never seen before? Maybe not since the 50 touchdown season.
I think he's going to be somewhere in between last year and the 50 touchdown season. But the good thing for the Chiefs offense in general is, he makes plays on his own, which opens up plays for Tyreek and Kelsey and guys like that. But if you can make those plays and actually have those plays designed and know where someone's going to be, that makes it even easier for him to make that throw on the seam or on the sideline.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I just look at the numbers and I'm just like, I just really just trying to find a way to really reflect how good this offense could be through Mahomes' number, because you know it's going to go through 15. But another guy who fantasy managers are hoping gets involved, and I think you know who I'm talking about, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, a post-type sleeper, if you would, because this dude was going as high as 4 or 5 last year in some PPR leagues after the Damian Williams opt-out news. He missed 3 regular season games, but he was the RB22 in total PPR points, averaging 13.5 PPR points per game. He was the Chiefs' leading rusher with 181 carries for 803 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's also added 54 targets for 36 receptions, 297 yards, and 1 touchdown. Fantasy managers were frustrated at times with CH's lack of production. Then the Chiefs signed Le'Veon Bell, who I thought ruined the flow that CEH was kind of getting into. And we saw a decline in his workload as a result of that. He did start to get these lead opportunities again, but would miss the end of the season with an injury. So all in all, it just leaves a bad taste in the mouth of fantasy managers. Going off the board as the RB14 according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP. Mike, how are we feeling about the price on Clyde Edwards-Helaire currently?
So I am one of those fantasy football owners, and I will say fantasy football and Kansas City Chiefs fan that was frustrated as all get up last year. Part of the reason I was frustrated with him is what happened in between the 10-yard line and the goal line. I can't tell you how frustrated I was when I saw him get the ball at the 10 or the 5, when I pretty much knew he was not getting into the end zone. It was just frustrating. I'm one of those fantasy football players that likes all around backs, and to me, wasn't enough of a goal line guy. You knew that he wasn't going to be scoring around the 2, the 3-yard line. You'd get the ball, hit the line, and just go down. I think that's one of the reasons they brought in Le'Veon Bell, which I completely agree with you that he ruined the mojo and the speed that he had going. He had the momentum. I am worried a little bit about him. But I think running back 14 to 18 is where I'd be drafting him right now. But we all know, if you've been in this game like me and you have for a while, even if I'm newer on the, in the business, but just playing the game of fantasy football, this is exactly what Andy Reid likes to do with his running backs. This isn't new. This is just like Brian Westbrook, and just like, he even did it with, Shady McCoy. CEH right now is exactly the way Andy Reid likes to use running backs. And part of me is thinking that as soon as he was drafted by the Chiefs, it was just the enamoredness of him going to an offensive like that almost blinded everyone in last year's drafts.
Yeah, it's funny because as you're saying it, as you're talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and how I wasn't enamored with him as a prospect either. The only reason I moved him as high up my board as I did was because of the first round draft capital, and then you consider the landing spot with the Chiefs. But if a guy like DeAndre Swift had ended up in Kansas City,
that was what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Oh man. All right, a man can only dream. But no, to your point about, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell, I mean, these are the carry numbers for Clyde Edwards-Helaire before Le'Veon Bell got to Kansas City. No, let's not even say carry numbers. Let's just say touch numbers, right?
Yeah.
25, 16, 25, 19, 13, 30. Those through 6 weeks without Le'Veon Bell. Throw Le'Veon Bell into the mix. Week 7 against Denver, 9. Week 8 against the New York Jets, 9. Week 9 against Carolina, 8. Then you get a bye week, right? After the bye, something happened. We saw less Le'Veon Bell, more Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now we've got 15 touches. We've got 12 touches. There's a game where he's inactive. I think he was sick, didn't have COVID, just was sick against Denver. Then he comes out the following week, 21 touches. Comes out the week after that, 15 touches. So definitely a stark difference from when Le'Veon Bell first got there versus the second half of that time when Le'Veon Bell was on the Chiefs. But then he suffers the injury against New Orleans. and can't play against Atlanta and the Chargers. And so obviously that season just left a really bad taste. But I just remember at the end of the season, as I'm seeing Clyde Edwards-Helaire start to get this volume again, fantasy managers did not want to play him. And I think you could take the temperature of fantasy managers and kind of people through Twitter, and you could see people didn't want to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I think that, maybe some of that bleeds into this offseason where he's become such a polarizing player, where I think any player in the Chiefs offense that would probably get the touches that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is expected to get, the workload he's expected to get, would be considered top 5, top 10 in fantasy, whereas Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going in the second round of drafts. So let's move on to the wide receiver position, Mike. And Tyreek Hill, absolute stud, man, in 2020. 135 targets, which he turned into 87 catches, 1,276 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns, also added 123 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in 15 games. He's such a dynamic weapon in the Kansas City Chiefs offense and continues to be the go-to option at the wide receiver position. Finished as the wide receiver 2 in total points and PPR points per game at 21.9. He's currently priced as the wide receiver 1. Mike, are you buying?
Yes, and yes. Tyreek Hill, just like you said, that the Chiefs offense goes through number 15. The wide receivers goes through number 10. I am buying, but I will also preface this by saying I wouldn't be surprised if he's not the wide receiver 1 in the NFL, but he's not going to be outside of like wide receiver 4. I mean, it's not one of those cases where he could be, wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 7 or 8, and you're going to lose that value. There's only, to me, a couple handful of guys that could top him in scoring, and I'll say a couple of, like, you could have, I wouldn't be surprised with Aaron Rodgers coming back that if Devontae Adams was to reach that. But if I was drafting right now, I would have no problem drafting Tyreek Hill in the wide receiver 1 category of a draft. But just the way I draft, I wouldn't do that in the first round, but that's just the way I draft. If I can get him, my wide receiver 1 in the second round and he's there, I would do it. But just the way I play, I'm probably not drafting him in round 1.
Yeah, I'm with you to an extent. I don't necessarily – I look to draft those running backs early, especially right now. That position is not deep, and so everyone's trying to avoid that running back, trying to pick a running back in the running back dead zone that Denny Carter dubbed it. And so, I think a lot of managers are trying to go running back early, thus leaving these wide receivers. But Tyreek Hill, man, I mean, I'm with you. He's a guy that can easily finish as the wide receiver 1, but will not finish less than 3 or 4 because he had a bad rap early for being a guy that had some inconsistency, which I think he did have. But he's a guy that developed, especially as Mahomes started to really become the man. Mahomes just really established some chemistry where Tyreek Hill is like, he's consistent. He had one game last year, one PPR game within the single digits. That was week 6 against Buffalo. But outside of that, I mean, what wide receiver is going to give you the ceiling that this guy can give you?
Well, that's the other thing. That's the other thing I was going to say is every team has a speedster that can go. When you have a guy like Mahomes that can just throw the ball down the field and let someone go catch it, usually that guy is not your number 1 guy. It's not usually your number 1 receiver that you go, hey, QB, throw the ball and let the wide receiver just go get it. That's not like your number 1 receiver. That's your speedster. That's not your guy who's also the number 1 wide receiver on your team. And that just happens to be both for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill has done such a great job of becoming more than just a downfield speed receiver and more than just a gadget wide receiver. He's running like a variety of different routes, and he becomes a better wide receiver every year that he's out there playing the position. Only had one game last year where it was less than 6 targets. That was a 3 target game against Buffalo, which also matched his lowest scoring output. So, this is a guy that I think, again, absolutely phenomenal. I think you want, if you want a piece of the Chiefs offense, Tyreek Hill is probably one. He's priced appropriately. Let's just put it that way. He's probably the one that you don't have to go reaching for with his price point. Back half of the first round. You could with the week winning upside that this guy has, it's totally worth it. All right, man. Let's move on to the wide receiver 2 position, and this one not so much fun to talk about. But it's one that managers are always trying to figure it out because we know what could be here if we do figure it out. And so we saw Sammy Watkins move on to Baltimore, so he removed himself from the equation here. But Mecole Hardman, who has just been teasing fantasy managers for 2 years now, he's still there. He was third on the team with targets with 62, which he was able to turn into 41 catches, 560 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. Apparently, still not has still not fully gained the trust of this coaching staff because he was in and out of the starting lineup last year, finishing as the wide receiver 62 in PPR points per game with 7.6. Or no, not even the wide receiver 62 in PPR points per game. The wide receiver 62 overall, but 7.6 PPR points per game. Demarcus Robinson did not fare much better. 59 targets for 45 catches, 466 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Was the wide receiver 70 with 6.7 PPR points per game. And last but not least, Byron Pringle, who flashed at different times last year. Over the last 2 years, he's flashed actually. In terms of ADP, Hardman has the lead as the wide receiver 51. Then it's Robinson at 88. And then it's Byron Pringle at wide receiver 93. Are we going to do this to ourselves again, Mike, and try to find a Chiefs tertiary pass catcher? And if so, which one's it going to be?
All right, this is a big subject for me, being a diehard Chiefs fan. We know that Mecole Hardman was drafted by the Chiefs when, not to bring up old stuff, but we know that they drafted Hardman thinking that Tyreek Hill wasn't going to be able to play that year for off the field issues. So they drafted him to be the replacement for Hill, not to be the contemporary for Hill. And that's how I feel in 2021. I am not touching Hardman. I can't do it. I have him I know we're talking redraft, but I have him in one dynasty league, and I am trying to shop him left and right. It's not happening. If I make one of my bold calls for the Chiefs this year is that Demarcus Robinson ends up the wide receiver 2. I don't know if I would draft him. You can probably get him in waiver wire because he is going so deep. But my bold call is that Hardman ends up being the wide receiver 3, and he is not on the team in 2022.
Yeah, it's tough because you're totally right. I mean, they did draft Mecole Hardman under the pretenses that under the belief that Tyreek Hill would be unavailable. Mecole Hardman, however, has continued to just tantalize. And I think maybe the hope amongst fantasy managers is that maybe Tyreek has evolved into more than a gadget player, where Mecole Hardman can also kind of just take some of these gadget type things that he was doing and maybe add some more things to his plate. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't find myself, gravitating towards Mecole Hardman. I mean, the price is definitely cheaper than it was last year, but when you look at the guys he's going around, I mean, we just had a conversation, in the last segment talking about the Chargers. Mike Williams is going 2 spots ahead, or 4 spots ahead rather, of Mecole Hardman. I'm taking Mike Williams. I'm sorry, because at the end of the day, Mike Williams is gonna you don't have a question about whether Mike Williams will be out there with the starters. Your only question is, will he stay healthy and will he produce?
I'm taking Mike Williams, and I'm a Chiefs fan.
Yeah,
hands down. I'm taking Mike Williams every day of the week over that.
I mean, Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 50. Like Henry Ruggs. I mean, I'm going to talk Raiders in the next segment, but Henry Ruggs should not, nowhere, in no world should Henry Ruggs be going lower than Mecole Hardman in drafts. Like, absolutely not. What are your thoughts on that?
That's another one that Ruggs is one of those guys that I'm kind of on the fence about just because of his production, and I don't trust the Raiders coaching staff, and I know you'll talk about that in your next segment, but I agree with you. I mean, he's still younger. He's still got the promise. It's only his second year. The thing with Hardman is fantasy owners think, and it's football fans too, just like me being a Chiefs fan and just in general, is everyone thinks that Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy or whoever he has as the offensive coordinator that year can make something out of nothing. And I think this might be one of those cases that you can't make lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, I'm with you. We do prop these guys up in the Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, thinking that these guys can definitely make these players better than they are. Like, oh, Mecole Hardman, like look at Deshaun Jackson and look what Tyreek Hill did and look at Jeremy Maclin, like he'll figure it out. And um we can just hope, right? Third-year breakout is always it's usually a thing with especially the wide receiver position, especially with a guy like Mecole Hardman, who was really he was more of an athlete than a wide receiver when the Chiefs drafted him. So we'll definitely see. Like you said, I totally agree with you. I'm not touching him though. Let's move on to the tight end position. This one's easy.
Yeah.
Travis Kelsey absolutely dominated in 2020, 145 targets, 105 receptions, 1,416 yards, which was a tight end record, and 11 touchdowns, 19 and a half PPR points per game. He just dominated the tight end position last year. Not even going to entertain, because he was the clear number one option at the position. I'm not even going to entertain a conversation about his tight end ADP. Not even going to go there. Let's talk about player ADP, because that's the conversation I think that needs to be had when we talk about Travis Kelsey. According to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP, currently going off the board as the 5th overall player behind Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. Are you in on that price?
No, I am not. And that I'm not on that price. And trust me when I say this, listeners, this has nothing to do with the fact that Travis Kelsey is not an amazing player. His stats, if you do draft him here, he is going to win you leagues. He is going to get you points. But to me, I know tight end is limited up top. It's, 3 or 4 guys. But just like you said, to me at this point, with the way running backs are going this year, I can't not take certain other running backs over this. I'm taking Chubb. I'm taking Zeke. If I was to go tight end, I would probably I'm taking him over Jonathan Taylor, but I'm definitely taking Chubb and Zeke over him, partly because of just the fact that we all know there is a cliff off with the running backs. There's obviously a cliff off with the tight ends as well, but I just think you can do better if you get your running back now instead of having lower end running backs.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, I look at my rankings now. I've basically got Travis Kelsey sitting here at 11. I moved Aaron Jones up, so I did have him at 10 after the Aaron Rodgers news. I ended up moving Aaron Jones up, but I've Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, and then I have Jonathan Taylor one spot ahead of Travis Kelsey.
Where do you have Zeke?
I've got Zeke as my RB4 and my 4th player.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you.
Yeah, I'm expecting a bounce back year for Zeke. I think that, and you could tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think Travis Kelsey is more valuable than any receiver that you could take in this spot.
Yes. And even I think he's going to have a little bit of regression.
Yeah.
And that's not because he's gotten worse. It's just the fact that 145 targets, I mean, that's just freaking ridiculous for any player in the league. I mean, you drop off that to like 130, and that is still one of the best years a tight end has ever had in the history of the game. And to sit there and think he's going to get 11 TDs, yeah, he very well could. But he could go to 9 and still be completely baller and be the number one tight end again.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage that he provides you over any tight end versus like, Devontae Adams 25 PPR points last year versus Tyreek Hill's like 22, right? The tight end, Travis Kelsey scored, 150 points more than the tight end 3. Like I'm taking Travis Kelsey before I touch a receiver, but I do agree the running back position is one where it's one where you're probably going to have to take those running backs early. But I could also see an argument where I could see a world where somebody says, hey, I'm picking at 6 or 7. I can get Travis Kelsey, and I know that people are down on a DeAndre Swift, or people are down. People have questions about a Najee Harris, or people obviously hate Joe Mixon every year. So I could still get me one of these guys that has RB1 upside, but I've at least locked in my tight end position, which I'll never have to worry about. The only thing there is I think what separates the DeAndre Swifts and then the Najee Harris and the Chris Carsons of the world, or not even Chris Carsons, but the Joe Mixons of the world, is these guys are Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, Zeke Elliott, Derrick Henry. Uh, you know those guys right there are locked to see 20, 30 touches. When you talk about what Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler do from a receiving standpoint, and how special guys like Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor are with the ball in their hands, and the upside that they do have when they do get to that 20-30 carry mark, 20-30 touch mark. I think that alone is what separates that tier, and is what maybe managers are really looking for when they're grabbing these guys early versus trying to grab some of these other guys later. But Mike, man, this was definitely a wonderful conversation, brother. I definitely appreciate the time, man. But I got to ask you one more question before I let you go. And I think I already know the answer, but we're just going to ask it anyway. Are the Chiefs going to win the division? Will they finish first? And because you're a Chiefs fan, I'll do a follow-up question. Are they going to a Super Bowl again?
Yes, they're going to win the division. I want to preface that by saying I think the Chargers are 1 year away from giving us a real trouble. I'm not worried about the Raiders. I'm sorry, Raider fans. I'm not worried about you guys yet. Broncos need to figure out the quarterback situation. Even though I do kind of like Locke, they're not going to give it to him, and he's probably not going to start the rest of the year. Chargers are 1 year away. We are going to win the division. I do believe we're going to get to the Super Bowl. But the Tennessee Titans, I believe, are the biggest pain in our rear end to get there, because I think they are a team that is going to give us trouble majorly, and partly because Derrick Henry and our defense has the hardest time stopping really good running backs. And then you add Julio Jones in the situation. I am worried about that team.
Yeah, I was just talking to my guy Drew Trammell about the Chargers, man, and I was trying to make the case, man. He wasn't trying to hear it, but I'm like, hey, man, the Chargers, there's a world where they can make some noise here in this AFC West.
They're gonna make noise. They're gonna make noise. They're gonna surprise a few people. I really do think. I see them making the playoffs. I mean, I do see them getting a wild card spot.
Yeah, no, they're definitely gonna make the playoffs. But I remember there was a time I think the Chargers to win the AFC West was like plus 1,400, and I'm like, how's Patty's toe doing?
Yep.
But hey, you didn't answer the other question. Are they going to Super Bowl?
Yes.
All right.
Going to the game. Going to the Super Bowl.
All right, that's what I need to hear, man. All right, Mike. We know you're writing for, you're doing some writing for Going for Two. Why don't you let everybody know what else you got cooking, where they can follow you, where they can find you, what other work you might have going on, brother. Why don't you fill everybody in?
All right, you can find me on the Twitter machine at Drop the Mic FF. Just like John said, I am the lead Dynasty writer at Going for Two, and I do some rankings in over there. And I just found out a couple of days ago that I will be co-hosting a show during the season on Friday nights on the Going for Two live network.
Yo, so there you go. There you have it. Make sure you go check Mike out. He's one of the good guys in the community, one of the good peoples. Dude works real hard. He grinds, and he's really passionate about what he does. Just like a lot of us in the community, but Mike definitely lets that passion show. So make sure you go check him out. Make sure you go follow him on Twitter, and make sure you check out his new shows that he got coming out. But Mike, man, we appreciate you, brother. Definitely appreciate you coming on. And everybody listening, we'll catch y'all later. Peace.